Welcome to This Week in Teams, episode 25. Today, Craig and Jay have the pleasure of interviewing Office Apps and Services MVP Chris Hoard from the United Kingdom. If you've ever wondered why everyone is talking about third-party apps for Microsoft Teams and how your company can keep your data safe when using them, this is your episode. Good morning, everybody. This is Jay Leask and Craig Jenke from This Week in Teams, and with us we have the education lead at Fusion, Chris Hoard. Chris, how are you today?
I'm great, guys. How are you?
It's a day off, and I'm working, so you know.
It's Monday. It's winter, and I'm outside of Chicago, so it's actually not bad. It's about little right around freezing. We got a little bit of snow overnight, so the kids are excited about it. Other than that,
it's not too bad here in the UK. I mean, I think it's about 6 or 7 degrees, so it's quite balmy for this time of year.
Now that's a Celsius one, right? 6 or 7 Celsius.
Correct.
Okay. I'm like 6 or 7 is not balmy.
That's right.
So I figured we were dealing with, since we have that wide European audience that we normally draw from, I went with freezing, and I just that way we don't have to worry about Fahrenheit and Celsius.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
So Chris, thank you for joining us. Craig and I are going to try and spotlight some of the community leaders, community speakers over the next series of episodes here, and the three of us are actually all speaking at M365 Friday California this coming Friday, although who knows when you're listening to this. So Friday, January 22nd. And I saw that you were doing a presentation about Teams as a platform, and we really wanted to kind of talk through what that was, get an opportunity to introduce people to what they probably already know, but maybe not by name. And really have an opportunity to talk about your community experience, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the session that I'm doing in California on Friday is called Microsoft Teams App Management Fundamentals. And as you say, it's all about managing applications within Microsoft Teams, and refers to this idea of Teams as a platform. Now, Teams as a platform is really important if you're involved within Teams or thinking about Teams in your organization today. So Teams is a application which brings together collaboration and communication. So it's bringing together chat and meetings and calling and apps. But the kind of the thinking goes that by bringing all of your apps into Microsoft Teams, so whether they're Microsoft apps or whether they're third-party apps, Microsoft Teams becomes the base, the surface for which you use your applications, but also develop and build those applications, right? So this is now starting to think of Teams as a platform that facilitates other applications. It's a really interesting time.
Yeah, I know that's a huge push on Microsoft to push that ability for Teams going forward for the next year. So I have a question for you. How do you deal with your customers when they're talking about apps? Because I was telling Jay, we were talking about this before, but when I start getting into my customer and talking about apps in the platform, obviously people will sometimes allow the first party apps, but I often get shut down. All we want to do is turn off all the third party apps. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that if you look on social media and you look at applications that are to control or discover others, I think they really hit onto something, because one of the big problems, if I'm starting a conversation with a customer and I'm talking to their IT admin, or if I'm talking to their CEO, then the first thing they will probably turn around and say is that I don't know what apps my users are using. I don't know what's actually inside our environment. Now, one of the big things for Microsoft as over the past few years has been this idea of cloud app discovery, of finding out, because how can you ultimately control without knowing what applications you actually have inside your environment, whether that's on people's laptops or on their mobile phones. So for me, the conversation is always very much discovering and taking an inventory, and if we can actually see what we've got and we can see what our users are using, only then can you really have a kind of a real conversation about management, because otherwise everything's going to be what we call in IT shadow IT. It's going to be hidden in this invisible area,
That never happens.
Yeah. And that shadow
Why
IT,
are you spreading false lies?
yeah,
Just
yeah. And shadow IT is where that place where you tend to have breaches occur, or malicious activity inside a risk happening. So it's really important to get some visibility and line of sight on it.
Nice. Yeah. No, good explanation. Yeah, you're right. Discoverability becomes important. So Jay would like to know this one. Yeah, don't look at me like that, Jay. So,
right.
Where do you find the most pushback when we start talking about that kind of thing, like the discovery and there are certain, because I've got some, I deal with a lot of different diversity. Jay works more in the government and those kind of things. Do you find government to be tighter with their controls? I know that they have to be, but how do you find like working with the users and trying to explain those kind of things to them?
Yeah, I think two important factors when it comes to application management is the first is really scale, and the second is down to, I guess, compliance and regulations. So if we think about those small companies, the ones that are 10, 20 users in size that probably have no dedicated IT, you go in and you have a look about what they're doing with Microsoft Teams or with Microsoft 365 all up. And it's 90% of the time it's a bit like the Wild West. There's no controls. It's just been set up. The license has been assigned. The users don't even know what availability or apps, should I say, that are available. The admin hasn't taken the time to go through and think if those apps are right for users. However, if you move into the mid-market or the enterprise, so when we're talking about hundreds moving into the thousands, then they tend to have dedicated IT teams with a little bit more thought around this and a traditional IT background and knowledge, whereby this becomes something that's more important to, I guess, to the organization. So that's scale. In terms of security and compliance in those regulated industries, so we see in governance or in finance, for example, those are also the type of organizations that tend to think or to value this quite highly and have it quite high up on the agenda. If you have other organizations that, I guess, like are more private businesses, even though they can be quite big, again, they may focus more upon the productivity aspects of applications rather than the security and compliance. So in those type of environments, you see that it's a lot more, it doesn't have as many regulations or compliance standards put in place. So scale and I guess compliance regulations, they're the two things that I think that really distinguish a company's use of apps.
Do you, so does the UK have a similar structure like the US does? So in the US, we've got the commercial cloud, and then we've got varying levels of government clouds, for the federal civilian versus the defense, et cetera. Do you guys have similar structures?
Yeah, they are similar. So if we're taking Microsoft 365, then we have the commercial cloud version. So for private businesses, we have the government version. We have the education version. Okay. You see, education is actually a good example of another type of industry that has to apply, for regulations and compliance. And it has to think about what applications, for example, its students are using. So I would put education, edu, right up there with the governance and the finance sectors.
Yeah, it's been interesting as we've seen more. So Teams as a platform became very important this year as a name, I think, but it's always been that central hub. First it was, here is access to your chats and your documents and Let's integrate in, OneNote or Planner, etc. And as these pieces have been added, it's been interesting to see the government lag for us, which is getting much smaller. But I remember my first conversations with a government customer were all about how they can't roll it out until OneNote and Planner are available. And now we've actually just recently had the release of the ability to sideload any app, so any third-party app or your own app into the environment. So you don't have to get it from the store. You can actually install it in your tenant that way. And it's just been interesting to watch the industry be able to get more and more capability, because the end users are really focused on, give me the capability, help me be productive, help me meet my mission. And then you've got security and IT saying, okay, we want to help you, but we have to watch these rules. We have to make sure it's this secure. And so it's just that dichotomy for me, that industry dichotomy. But also, you mentioned finance, energy, each industry having its own problems there. And I don't know what question I'm asking.
I mean, I guess it probably, I mean, you're saying about the kind of the functionality,
Yeah.
that opening up with, Teams as a platform. Teams as a platform, if we think about Teams, it now has over 800 store applications that are available to be installed into Microsoft Teams and to use. And as you said as well, you can go on to develop your own apps or your bots or messaging extensions. You can even connect up your other apps via webhooks or connectors. And Microsoft have worked in opening up what it calls the surface, where you can bring those applications into Teams. So you can do it in chats, in channels. You can now even do it in meetings, which they released at the back end of last year. But the important thing about this is that by moving away from, I guess, just a communication and collaboration tool, so just using things like chat and meetings and calling, to starting to use apps, to be the place where you start using all of your apps, has loads of benefits for users. I mean, firstly, it's like Teams becomes almost like a second operating system, a bit like Windows. It's the place where you're there and you can do more and more of your work. If you bring in the apps that you need, then users are going to be more productive without having to leave the surface and go off on the internet to access all different types of apps, or go to Windows or start pinballing around everywhere. The other kind of big benefit is that you, by having more and more apps within Teams, you can take those apps and start to tailor them to each particular team's use. So a finance team's use of apps might be different from an operation team's use of apps. And you can bring all those apps together. And when they're integrated into Teams, you can begin to, I guess, link up your workflows between those apps. And again, that's becoming increasingly important. In addition, by opening up the, I guess, custom apps is what they're called. So when you can build your own apps and sideload them into Microsoft Teams, then you can tailor your apps to your specific use cases within your business and within each particular team. An example of a custom app would be that I build an app for, let's say that I want to request time off. So every time I wanted to request time off within a business, there's no particular app that's out of the box, out of those 800 apps in the store. So I can come along and I can build my own, and I can build my own in full code. So if I use I guess my own, I can write it in C# and I can use Visual App Studio, or I can use the SharePoint framework in order to build that, or I can do so via the Power Platform, which is what they call low code, no code. That means that Microsoft provide you with tools to be able to build those apps, and you don't have to have a development background. You can start. It's a point and click experience. It's very easy to go and build apps, even if you haven't got a background in app building.
Cool. So there's a lot to unpack in those couple answers that you've given us so far. So I'm going to recap this. One that I've heard that we need to do an inventory, right? So before we start doing anything, make sure we know what we have and where we want to go. 2, start thinking about what apps we want our users to use, and different apps will want to have, different people will want to have access to different apps. Fortunately, in Teams, there are ways that I can say, hey, if you're in this group, you can get these apps, and if you're not, then you can get these apps. So kind of using that use case. And then there's third, we can do, if the apps don't meet what we want, we can build another app. So if we want to either take the low code power platform approach, or if we want to go full out of the box, create something where we're hard coding using Visual Studio or Visual Code, or even, I'm going to slide a little bit here, we could do something with JavaScript frameworks or something else. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Microsoft type of based framework. All good stuff. So for me, I guess my question is, how do you recommend that people start going through that journey? What tools must an admin, other than, like, I know if I were to look at another organization, they would have either Excel spreadsheets or maybe Microsoft lists, right, to track some of this stuff. But how do you suggest, not so much, okay, we've done the inventory, how do we start deciding and making sure people have access to the apps they want, and when and how should I build my custom apps? I know that's kind of open, so I'm going to let you run with that.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the tools for being able to, I guess, distribute those apps to those particular users, then you have that within Microsoft 365. You have that within the Teams Admin Center, the administrative console, where you control Microsoft Teams all up, and you can turn apps on or off. As you say, you can, so turning apps on and off makes them available or unavailable in the Teams App Store. You can have what you call app permission policies. So that's whether certain people can have these apps or not. So let's say you've got one group of people within inside your organization who needs to use that app, but another set of users that you don't want to use that app, then you can give them 2 different policies and assign them to each of those. So you can very much, I guess, build these custom policies and really personalize the experience on a team by team, or even on a user by user basis, as to what apps that they can actually use. So you've also got, I guess, Teams app setup policies. So app setup policies define on the left side of Microsoft Teams which apps will be to hand and how they will show up. And you can also just recently have pre-installed apps into Teams. So that app setup policy does that too. So when you set it up for a user and you apply that app setup policy, then you can specify the apps that are loaded into that. In addition, you also have controls for custom apps. So this is the custom apps that we were saying that you can build and sideload and upload. Then you can control them from an organization perspective as to whether you want users to be able to upload those or not. So the features are pretty granular. If there's one thing that's, I guess, lacking in Teams right this second, is that you can pinpoint a specific user and say the whole amount of apps that they are completely using across the whole of Teams. There's a user voice open for that, and it's something that I think in a Teams admin center that would bring it a lot of value.
So just so I'm clear, is that like a discovery, like a report that you want that says, okay, if I run it on Jay's using these 5 apps, or is it something different than that?
No, that's exactly right. So
okay.
If you can imagine in the Teams admin center where you have Jay as a user, then as an admin, and this would be good for as a user as well within Teams, that you could actually see all the apps that you are entitled to use across the whole of all the teams that you're actually in, because that you would then be able to build a report, particularly from an admin perspective, that can pinpoint what apps they're using, should those users be using those apps. There isn't something like that involves today. You would need to use something like Cloud App Security, for example, and monitor their session to see where the connections to the apps are being made. it needs to be more explicit than that.
So while we're in areas of improvement, is there anything else that you would like to see added to the app management?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see that inventory list. I would also like to be able to have assign apps within the Teams admin center to particularly security groups or to Microsoft 365 groups, so that they recently introduced what they call group policy, where for other Teams policies such as calling meetings, but they've not done that yet with apps. You can, I think if my memory serves me correct, you can do it via PowerShell as an admin, but in the Teams admin center to be able to do that and just assign it to everyone in the security group would make it really easy for people to be able to determine access to those apps. In addition, there is one other thing I'd love to see in there. There's a few. There's some room. Is the ability to see where your data is in those apps.
Yes.
So where data residency is in the Teams admin center. So if you're an admin, you can specifically see that I'm going to allow this app inside my organization. I 100% know where my data in that application is going to be housed, because we might be infringing on compliance and regulations, even if we start to use that app. And the scary thing is that when you start using Teams and you've rolled it out, all the apps are turned on. So all the app permission policies are open, as it were. So what that means is, in layman's, is that any user on day one can use any app within the App Store, any 800 of them, install them and begin using them and signing up there today. And you know, most users.
And that leads to where we started this whole conversation at, where I talked to my customer, and the first thing they want to do is shut them all off. So, which makes sense. And then they want to be able to do a lot of the things that you're talking about, do the inventory, see what they're having, which they probably already should have done first, right? But but then they want to start evaluating the app, see where the data lives, and that whole thing. So
I mean, Teams as a platform is like in a sense a bit of a double-edged sword in some ways, particularly from an admin's perspective. I myself as an admin, it's great that they can have these hundreds of applications within there. You want them to be able to have all the tools that they use to be able to work with, identify apps that if they're using other applications outside of the Microsoft ecosystem, we may be able to save money for the organization and move them in. But on the other hand, what you don't want them to do is it be like a sweet shop and they go in and light up 3 dozen or 4 dozen applications, because that's going to give you a bit of a headache, because you ultimately could have corporate data put in all of those applications, and then you need to rein it back in. And at least here in the UK, we really have two types of I guess, when it comes to apps. You have organizations that will not turn any of this on. These tend to be those ones in regulated environments, or the big ones that have the dedicated team. But I deal with a lot of small, to medium sized businesses, and they've not only lit up Teams, but they don't even know which users in Teams have installed which applications into their Teams and their channels. So they're already in flight. So by the time you get to them, you have to do almost a piece of work to roll it back to a state and close down all the apps, and then say, right, we're going to go again, and we're going to do it properly this time, or kind of work out of it to identify which ones we're going to close down and which ones we're going to move ahead with.
Yeah, it's we have the same conversation just generically on Teams governance. Is, an organization rolls out Teams, and a lot of the conversations we have with U.S. government customers is they get enough from a security perspective from Microsoft that they just go, okay, roll it out, we're there. And then you've opened the bottle, like you've rubbed on the lamp, the bottle is opened, all the features are there, and the next thing you know, you've got hundreds of teams with no controls, and you don't know what's being used and what's not, and you have to start all over again. You have to do an inventory, you have to evaluate the use. You have to determine if there's a security concern. So it sounds like the app management is very similar to the team's governance in general, in that you have to understand what you have to understand what you want them to have, and you have to have a plan for making sure it's secure. And I really like your comment on data residency. I would love to see that move forward in some way, because that's the biggest concern that we hear is, what data is this app going to have access to? Where is it storing this data? What can it do with this data? I mean, that's massive. It's not data is knowledge, or knowledge is the currency of our organizations, and not knowing where that's stored and what can touch it is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this kind of conversation all the time, and I think that to a lot of people that I speak with, they kind of play to stereotypes. So it tends to be they tend to think of things like the admin is pushing down on their users about security, and users are kind of pulling at the administrator to do with productivity. It kind of really needs to be the other way around. I feel that from an admin perspective, we need to look at it from the perspective of trying to make our users as productive as possible. Whereas in users, they have to kind of reorientate to a bit more security conscious to say, if I'm using this app, where is my data stored? When I click that button and I install it, what am I actually doing? What am I installing into our environment? So there definitely needs to be a dialogue and an education with users. But if this Teams as a platform, I guess, is going to work, it's not, I guess, going back to that kind of analogy of a sweet shop, it's not you have carte blanche and then suddenly you can install anything you want when you want at any time. That isn't productivity or security. That's none of those definitions. It's getting a proper process with inside your organization that you run through to be able to validate, or to identify, as we said earlier with Craig, to validate, to start on a small scale and proof of concept, and then roll it out across the organization and identify the users that are going to benefit from that. I hear this conversation quite a lot where some organizations that run through this will trust the Microsoft applications within Microsoft Teams and no third-party applications. So they tend to start out right that everything from Microsoft is turned on and all the third-party apps are turned off. But really, it's about kind of, I guess, educating organizations to say what are the apps that are right for them. And that's the kind of the journey that we need to be on, whether they're third party, whether they're Microsoft, is how do we get your teams most productive? That is the end game, as it were. Get them the apps that are going to help them do their best work. That's and there's a bit of working out to do in that.
So Chris, this has been very educational, which fits with your current role. So let's move a little bit. We got to wrap up here in the next few minutes. Let's do a little bit of a rapid fire. There's not a lot of questions, but let's do a little rapid fire that kind of comes off of that. So, what is your current role in the professional world there?
Okay, so my role is a partner education lead. So for the business that I work for, I head up the education part of the group. And so I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I build and run courses to teach them on Microsoft technologies.
All right. And Craig, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I always love to know, I think we were talking about this earlier, but me and Jay run user groups. We've done a small conference. We did M365 Chicago just the other week. I always like to know how people actually got, it was the other week. It was 2 months ago, but it seemed like the other week. It all blends together. How you got started?
I mean, obviously from speaking at Chicago, it was a brilliant event. It was a really successful day. How I got started was I come from a corporate background, the corporate world. I kind of cold-faced it in the corporate world for over 10 years. I felt like I wanted something more. I was even thinking of maybe stepping out or trying something new. And I decided to hop on the tech community one night. So the Microsoft tech community, techcommunity.microsoft.com, is forums in Microsoft technology where you can go and answer questions for people. And I did that for an evening, and then I answered a few people's questions. It got snowballed from there. I kind of met people through the tech community. I started kind of finding out when events were. I then started speaking at events. Then set up my own blog and all the other stuff that kind of rolls into MVP world. So it really was a case of just going to the Microsoft tech community and starting that way.
So you said you started talking at events. Where was your first one?
Ooh. The Microsoft Ignite 2019 was my first speaking event.
What?
Wow, that's impressive.
You know, I'd spoken for my own user group before that, but in terms of an event that was put on by somebody else other than myself, I just thought that I'd go for it. And I remember the experience because it was at the Orange County Convention Center in Florida, and I remember right before the first talk that I had, and I remember just walking past Martina Grom. I mean, she's a regional director, really big in in our field, and thinking you see all these superstars. I'm standing at the side of my stage, like on the phone on my mobile to my wife, saying, "Oh, I'm really nervous and stuff," and then you just get up and go for it. I mean, I used to be, before I worked in IT, I used to be a secondary school teacher, so I'm okay with public speaking, as it were, but. Yeah, not a lot of people don't know that. The first thing was Ignite 2019, and it was nerve-wracking as hell. And I think that the next time that, if I do manage to get back there again, it's going to be the same. I'll be a bag of nerves before I go on.
How did you move from secondary education to IT?
Wow. Do you know what? There was a lot of politics here in the UK with the teaching, and I just decided on a change. Basically, I was one of those that loved teaching, but didn't necessarily like the politics of it all. I decided on a change. The company that I work for now, I sent off a prospective application. I joined for 2 weeks temporary, and here I am. So
yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny old world. But you know what? I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I'm a lifer at this point now in IT. But it all started with just a temporary application for a temporary work, almost a 0 hours contract at the time. And I wasn't expecting anything more. So
that's awesome. How many presentations do you think you gave in 2020? The community style presentations, that is.
Oh, I think it was somewhere between 30 and 40. I think when and then of course, because I'm a trainer, you probably add another 30 days onto that.
Yeah.
And taking webinars. I've got a little friendly rivalry with Vesku Nopanen, who you know Vesku, and I think we counted that we each spoke somewhere in the region of between 70 and 80 days last year, because just for bragging rights and things like that. So, but in terms of events like Chicago, maybe around about 30.
Wow. I'm just envisioning for the Lord of the Rings geeks here, I'm envisioning Gimli and Legolas running around killing people in that one battle, counting their kills, you guys counting your presentations.
That's right. I'm the short and hairy one, so I'll be Gimli.
So to wrap us up here, Chris, to wrap us up, you're presenting on Friday. Your presentation is Microsoft Teams App Management Fundamentals. What time is your presentation? And feel free to just give me any time zone, and we'll make sure that people can look it up.
No, it's California, right? So that's Pacific. So that means that we're 8 hours ahead here in the UK. I think it's if my memory serves me correct, 11 a.m. In California. So that would make it 7 in the evening in Greenwich Mean Time in GMT. So Central Europe, it would be 8 p.m. And for Finland, it would be 9. So
I like how you're just traveling the world on this one.
Yeah, you can tell that, you know, I've organised a couple of events in my time, because you tend to think in multiple time zones on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, me and Jay have gotten decent at it now. We've been working together for a while, and Jay's East Coast and I'm Central, so it's always Eastern and Central when we talk.
Yeah, we're always listing multiple time zones, so I hear you on that.
It goes Eastern, Central, Mountain, Pacific, right?
It does. It does. It always amazes me to see how much people outside of the United States know about us and how little we know about everywhere else. But that's a conversation for another day, and potentially a politically charged one.
No, yeah. I mean, obviously we talked before the show and stuff. So yeah, I'll come back for another session, and we can talk about that.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Chris.
We should have recorded that part too, but we didn't know that was going to be interesting. We never know.
behind the scenes section, yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks again for coming on. We appreciate it. Jay, I'll let you wrap it out and name all the lists and things where we can find Chris and his information.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put these links in the blog, but Microsoft365pro.co.uk. Teams Nation is your user group, which you have a meetup for. But take a look for Teams Nation. They always have amazing content. And then you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle again?
Microsoft 365 Pro.
That's a good one. I'm shocked that was available.
I tell you a little story about that, right? Just before we go, right? So when I originally done it, right, I'd worked a lot with Microsoft Corp on Microsoft 365. I'd done it since it was the Secure Productive Enterprise, right, back in 2016, before it was even named that. So I decided to have a Twitter handle called Microsoft 365 MVP. And I had it on Twitter, and then I had a load of people come through saying, no, you can't put that you're an MVP. So I changed it to Pro, and I said, I will be an MVP. And you know what? I'm a man of my word, but I haven't changed the handle back. The handle is stuck. So, you know,
that's awesome.
Just a little story.
That's fantastic. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing with us and for your time today. We look forward to your presentation on Friday.
It's a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye.